Good afternoon, everyone who's tuning in to TV Courtroom, hosted by yours truly, attorney Michael Cord, aka Michael Lex. We're going to have a powerful show today with a couple great guests. And get your pens out, get your pads out, because we're going to be talking about Philadelphia history in the form of Black history in the Philadelphia landscape. Author Amy Jane Cohen. We're going to talk more about that. And we're also going to have later in the show two young folks with an interesting organization called Youth Creating New Beginnings. And I'm so excited about having these young people here because they're young people. I can't tell you how frustrated I am with older generations, including myself and the generation before me and before that. Those who engaged in civil rights activism and civil disobedience and progressive activism, we do the right thing in our 20s and 30s and 40s, and then we get into our 50s and we still hold on to that, wanting to lead the movement. Then we get into our 60s and hold on to that and want to lead the movement. Don't get me wrong, older people, including myself, we ought to be a part of the movement, but we ought to be the wise elders. And we ought to be so wise, not just in the topics we're dealing with, but wise enough to pass the baton, to give it to the young people. In the same way we did what we did in our teens, in our 20s, in our 30s, and early 40s, we got to pass the baton to the younger people. The worst thing for a revolutionary to do is to die without passing the baton of the revolution. Because if he or she or they hold on to that baton too long, it winds up in the cemetery with them. And it's just my request that older folks, again, including myself, that we realize that sometimes you just got to hang the gloves up. Even better, sometimes you just got to pass the gloves to younger people. Let them put the gloves on. Let them step in the ring and let them fight, not just the good fight, but let them fight the better fight. Because when you're young, you're much more energetic, healthier for the most part. So I encourage people of my generation and older to be willing to pass the baton. That's why this group called Youth Creating New Beginnings is so important, because they have accepted the baton from people like me and others. And I know they're going to not only run the race, but run the race well and ultimately win. Getting back to Amy Jane Cohen, who's going to be with us in about 10 minutes or so. I know Amy, and I'm going to do a more formal introduction later in the show. But the thing that I really appreciate about Amy is that she's a real historian. And what I mean about a real historian is this. If you're white and you find out some bad stuff about white people and you're a real historian, you'll report that bad stuff. If you're white and you're a real historian and you find out some good stuff about Black people, you'll report that good stuff. And that's exactly what Amy does. As I say, we're going to have Amy on in about 10 minutes or so. So in my next 10 minutes, I got so much I want to talk to you about personally. Let me talk about what's near and dear to me, because everything that I am and everything that I have is the result of America's oldest HBCU. You guessed it, Historic Chain University, founded February 25, 1837, which means last week it was exactly 187 years ago to the very day that the school we know today as Chain University was founded. And if you follow the news, you probably heard about some accreditation issues. Accreditation basically is what makes a school legitimate. It makes a school authentic. It makes a school valid. That's in the general sense. But in the practical sense, you have to be accredited if you want to receive state and federal funding. And for schools like Cheney, HBCUs, most of these students that come in, or maybe definitely many of the students that come in, and arguably most of the students that come in, are first generation college students. So their parents don't have a whole lot of money. If their parents don't have a whole lot of money, parents can't write a check for the tuition. The children have to be able to get state grants and state loans, federal grants and federal loans. And in order to be eligible to receive those loans, you have to go to a school that's accredited. Well, if you've been following the media for the last couple of months, you heard that Cheney has an accreditation problem. But if you don't hear anything else I say today, hear this. Cheney University, my alma mater, where I got 2 degrees, we got a full academic scholarship law school, and then the man I am today, Cheney University is fully accredited, and Cheney University has always been fully accredited. Somebody asked me on social media, hey, Mike, I heard Cheney lost its accreditation. By the way, I want to be clear before I go on. Please pronounce the word properly. It's accreditation, not accreditation. I hear people who should know better say dation. It's accreditation. That's neither here nor there. Well, mostly it is here, but I just wanted to make sure that folks understand that. So somebody posted on social media, hey, Mike, I heard Cheney lost its accreditation. And no, Cheney did not lose its accreditation recently. It did not lose its accreditation years or decades ago. In fact, it's never lost its accreditation. And as we speak right here, right now, it's still fully accredited. People say, well, Mike, what's the problem? It's on probation. And it's on probation because of some non-academic reasons. People often think that, hey, a school is on probation, on accreditation probation because their academics are up to par. No, that's not Cheney's problem. You know what Cheney's problem is? Cheney's problem is limited resources. In other words, we don't have the money that Penn State has, that Temple University has, that Drexel has. Why? Because we're Black. And you know how it works here in America. For the most part, class and race are kind of sort of synonymous in America. Why? Is because Black folks are genetically predisposed to be poor? No. You want to know what it is? It's the residue of August 25, 1619. What happened in August of 1619? Slavery in the Virginia colony. And every day since then, Black folks have been receiving, as Brother Malcolm over my left shoulder used to say, Black folks have been receiving hell, not just physically and socially and legally, but certainly financially. That's why Cheney, which was found in 1837, nearly 30 years before slavery, quote unquote, ended in 1865, from day one, we've had obstacles to overcome. From day one, we've had roadblocks to overcome. But like the phoenix that rises from the ashes, that's Cheney University. We are still here. So you might say, okay, Mike, well, tell me more about the whole accreditation probation. Well, it's a group called the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. Middle States Commission on Higher Education. And the Middle States Commission on Higher Education basically said this, hey, Cheney, your books are straight, we got you. Your academics are straight, we got you. You got some students with some high GPAs and some high SAT scores. You got the honors program there. You got that Keystone honors program there. You got that Bond Hill graduate school program. You got some good stuff going on. So we're not questioning your academics. But as you know, Cheney, this is what the Middle States are saying. As you know, Cheney, colleges are a business. And in order for the business to be legit, the business got to have some money. The business got to have some resources. Cheney, your money ain't right. And Cheney is saying, well, our money ain't right because America ain't right. America ain't right. And when I say America ain't right, I mean slavery, 1619 to 1865. If you think it ended in 1865, you're sadly mistaken. If you ever read the 13th Amendment, it really didn't end slavery. It just created slavery by another name. And I'm looking at the clock here. I got about 6 more minutes to go off on my venting rage because I often do that because I'm angry. Why? James Baldwin put it well. I'm going to paraphrase him. James Baldwin, one of the greatest thinkers in American history, said, quote, well, it's not a quote, I'm paraphrasing. He said, to be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. Let me repeat that. To be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. That means if you know American history, if you see American current events, and if you're Black, you got to be angry. If you're not angry, you're stupid. If you see somebody oppressing you and beating you down constantly and relentlessly, if you see that, you're going to be enraged. That's what James Baldwin meant. James Baldwin meant when he said, to be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. That's why I call myself the angriest Black man in America. So we see Cheney, 1837, in the midst of slavery, which began in 1619, didn't end, quote unquote, until 1865 with the 13th Amendment, but it really didn't end. Because if you read the 13th Amendment, it does not say slavery and involuntary servitude are hereby abolished, exclamation point. It doesn't say slavery and involuntary servitude are hereby abolished, period. It says slavery and involuntary servitude are hereby abolished, comma, except following conviction of a crime. So what did America do? They made, quote unquote, slaves, and I hate that term, so the better phrase is enslaved human beings. They transformed enslaved human beings into criminals. How? They made up laws. Laws like vagrancy laws, saying that if you didn't have a job, that was a crime. It's laws like loitering. So if you were out on the street, out in the corner, that was a crime. Laws like curfew violation. If you were out past sundown, that was a crime. So once you were arrested for these crimes, a fine would be imposed. Well, you couldn't afford to pay the fine. So what would happen? You get caught up into convict leasing. Initially, the county sheriff would lock you up, county judge impose a fine. You can't afford to pay the fine. Why? Because you just got off the enslavement plantation. So now instead of being able to pay the money you don't have, you got to go back to that plantation and work off that fine. And if let's say you got a $50 fine for vagrancy violation, it's going to take you 2, 3, 4 months to work off that fine. So that's why there's a book by Douglas Blackman. You already get it. It's called Slavery by Another Name. Well, this stuff went from the 1860s for about 100 years to the 1960s. In the South, this kept going on into the mid 1960s. So you see situations like that. And then we get back to Cheney. Cheney in 1901 would get $10 per student from the state because Cheney was training people to become teachers. These Black students get $10 per student from the state as part of the tuition. Well, at the same time, 1901, the white students in white schools would get about 4 times that amount. Why is that? That's enslavement. That's Jim Crow. That's convict leasing. That's systemic racism. Got about 2 or 3 minutes before we get to our first guest, but let me just wrap this up. So follow the news. When you see that Cheney is on probation, accreditation probation, understand that we're still fully accredited, that we're fighting the good fight, and that we will get off probationary accreditation, I would guess, I would say within the next couple weeks at the latest, because this middle states group, they're getting pressure from the public, wonderful thing. Getting pressure from the governor, wonderful thing. I got to give the governor, Josh Shapiro, credit, and Daniel Greenstein, the chancellor of the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, I got to give them credit for rallying around Cheney, saying stop treating Cheney like a stepchild. Respect Cheney for its history, the first HBCU in America, for its academic accomplishments, and for Cheney fighting the good fight and winning the good fight to get its finances together. As soon as we get more students, and we will, why? We're in the process right now building a $48 million athletic facility, a $48 athletic facility. Remember that classic line from the movie Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come? I'm not saying that college students only love sports, but a lot of college students do love sports. So if we can get this nearly $50 million athletic facility, and it's under construction right now, as soon as we can get that, then great high school athletes will come to Cheney. And once great high school athletes come to Cheney, we'll have a great football team, a great basketball team, a basketball team, volleyball team. And once we have that, people will start coming to Cheney, more people. As a matter of fact, over the last 3-4 years, Cheney's enrollment has increased percentage-wise more than any other 13 state schools in Pennsylvania. So if you want more information about Cheney, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, read my article in the Philadelphia Tribune. Just Google phillytrib.com. That's phillytrib.com. Type in Cord, C-O-A-R-D, and type in Cheney. And once you do that, thanks to our producer extraordinaire, Roland, once you do that, you'll be like, wow, Cheney is really impressive. Damn right. Cheney is really impressive. Having said that, let me step off my soapbox so we can have other people talking. As I pointed out at the beginning of the show, we got guests dealing with two issues. One, Philadelphia history relative to Black folks, and two, an impressive group called Youth Creating New Beginnings. We want to get to that group later in the show, but right now we want to start with my first guest, Amy Jane Cohen. And we want to talk to Amy Jane Cohen because she's the author of a great book entitled Black History in the Philadelphia Landscape, Deep Roots, Continuing Legacy. And I'm going to spend about 30 seconds giving you a brief background about Amy, and then I want her to fill in the gaps. She's an educator, a historian. And by the way, I love the fact that people like Amy and I realize it's a historian, not an historian, because H is a consonant, not a vowel. But that's a whole nother story. Crazy. But anyway, I digress. Amy is an educator, historian, a writer. In terms of being an educator, she's a former teacher, 20 years as a social studies teacher, and then director of education for History Making Products. She's a contributing writer for Hidden City, Philadelphia. And most of the information I just shared with you is actually in the book, indicating who she is. I notice it doesn't say good friend of Michael Cord here, but we'll talk more about that later. I got to tell you, folks, this is one of the greatest books I've read about Black Philadelphia history. There are different sections, different parts. Part one dealing with the 17th and 18th century. If you don't know who Charles Blockson is, the great Charles Blockson, you got to get the book. Talks about Washington Square, where enslaved Black folks would find time to come together and quote unquote avenge their ancestors. The great Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. By the way, I noticed that in regard to Richard Allen, for folks who don't know, there's something called Bethel Burying Ground. And that's where about 5,000 Black folks in the 1800s buried under a trash dump in City Playground in South Philly. Well, Amy Jane Cohen, because she knows all the movers and shakers, actually has a section here featuring Karen Olivier. And Karen Olivier is actually the designer for the Bethel Burying Ground. And I didn't realize that about the book until I actually read it. And then, last but not least, there is the President's House, an attack. I've spoken of, by the way, the final thing I want to say about the book before we hear from the author is I love where part two gets into Pennsylvania Hall, and it pretty much asks the question, is this really the city of brotherly love? And then it wraps up, and this is the best part for me, with the revolutionaries, with Paul Robeson and Malcolm X High School and Cecil B. Moore and the Black Power movement. Enough of that from me. Without further ado, the author of the book entitled Black History in the Philadelphia Landscape, my good friend, make sure you got to add that at the back, Amy Jane Cohen. Amy, how are you today?
I'm great. Great to see you, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
I'm already sitting down, so I'm about to shut up because I'm going to turn it over to you. Why did you write the book? Who is the book for?
Okay, so I wrote the book because having taught the required African-American history course in Philadelphia in high school for 8 years, and then working for History Making Productions and working on many films about local Black history, and then continuing my study of local Black history by becoming a contributing writer for Hidden City, I noticed that there is a lot of hunger for information about local Black history, and not just among Black folks. People really want to know this information, and that was only accelerated and increased during 2020 and the Black Lives Matter and post-police murder of George Floyd. The interest only grew. So I started thinking, maybe this really could be a book, and no book like this exists. And so I thought about the great Toni Morrison, who said, if there's a book you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. So that kind of got me over the hump. I decided to focus on the landscape because I have a real interest in markers. As you might recall, back in 2004, I had students apply for a historical marker to commemorate an 1842 anti-Black riot. I'm also very interested in monuments. I was there when the Caddo statue was unveiled, and I actually remember about 2 days afterward, I went back to the memorial and I saw a man in a Cheney hat with a Cheney flag that he put in Caddo's hand to take a picture of it. So anyway, murals, markers, street names, that's kind of the lens through which I tell the story of local Black history. It's not comprehensive. It's not a super long book, but if someone's not familiar with local Black history, I think they'll get a good overview from the late 1600s to the late 1960s, early 70s Black Power movement. And if they are familiar with local Black history like you are, I hope that they get just a different lens on it because of this focus on the landscape. So your second question was, who's it for? It's really for the general reader. The main reaction I get from people is, this is so readable. This is so accessible. This is, people who don't think of themselves as enjoying history books. It's 19 10-page chapters. And at the end of each chapter, there is a list of things to do for further study, further learning. And at the end of some chapters, like the chapter on the President's House, where you wrote a reflection, there are reflections by community members who were either close to the history itself or close to the marking of that history, as you were with the President's House Memorial.
Those of you who just tuned in, you're listening to the voice of and listening to the voice of and looking at Amy Jane Cohen, author of Black History in the Philadelphia Landscape, Deep Roots and Continuing Legacy. Before I ask a follow-up question, Amy, where can folks get the book?
Okay, well, it's available. It's in bookstores such as the Barnes and Noble downtown. Uncle Bobby's, I know, will be getting copies. Harriet's will be getting copies. I've done an event there. Big Blue Marble in Mount Airy. Really, bookstores throughout the region. The Narberth bookstore carries it. Main Point Books on Wayne Avenue, I believe, in Radnor for suburban folks. Lots of different bookstores, but then it's also available at the usual places: Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Bookshop.org if you want to support your local independent bookstore, or through Temple Press. My website, AmyJaneCohen.com, has ordering information if you want a direct link to do it online rather than going to a bookstore.
At the beginning,
and I'm doing lots and lots of speaking events, so those are also described at my website.
Excellent. Absolutely. I said at the beginning, Amy Jane Cohen is a good friend of mine. And an example of that is when I asked her about where can she get it, she rattled off 3 or 4 Black owned and operated bookstores. Mm-hmm. Love it. That was first on her list. I really appreciate that. Amy, I talked about very briefly at the beginning of my introduction about you, your parts 1, 2, and 3, 17th and 18th century, 19th century, up to 20th century. Let me ask you, I know that you've always been a scholar of Black Philadelphia history, but what surprised you in your research? What did you not have any idea about until you did the research and said, wow, how come I never knew this?
Well, I mean, I've had so many moments like that across the last 20 plus years. So, what I tell people is this book took me a year to write, but it represents over 20 years of work. In writing the book itself, I knew I wanted to do a chapter about the brief period where Benjamin Franklin High School was called Malcolm X High School. And in doing that research, I learned a lot about time that Malcolm X spent in Philadelphia. And that was completely new to me. I mean, he was living up in Strawberry Mansion. On his days off, he would walk down to the Parkway. He was a big fan of the Academy of Natural Sciences. He liked to visit the Free Library of Philadelphia. He wasn't here that long, but that was just a connection that I wasn't aware of that took me by surprise.
Again, folks who are tuned in, you're listening to Amy Jane Cohen, educator, historian, and writer, talking about this powerful book that you see in front of me. We're going to spend another 8-9 minutes with Amy. Amy, in regard to the various centuries you focused on, what do you want to tell us about each of them? A particular point you want to make about the 17th century, about the 18th century, and then wrapping up with the 19th and 20th century. Just a little tidbit about each one.
Okay, it's interesting that you asked that. I really wanted the book divided into chronological sections, but no one's asked me that before. I think for the 17th and 18th century, for the first section, the big takeaway, at least the feedback I'm getting from folks who are reading the book, is a lot of people had no idea there was slavery in Philadelphia. And unfortunately, during those centuries, that's what a lot of the stories are about, is enslavement of people right here in the city of brotherly love. So I come at it in different directions, looking at the slave trade by looking at historical markers, resistance and community building by looking at Washington Square, the way that enslavement went all the way up to the level of the President of the United States in the chapter about the President's house. And then also, again, resistance and community building by looking at the actions of people like Richard Allen and Absalom Jones and the whole constellation of people that made Philadelphia the free Black capital. So those are the big themes of the first section. The second section really deals more with abolition and anti-abolition in the city. Examples like Pennsylvania Hall, the burning of an abolition meeting place 3 days after it was opened by the Philadelphia population.
In fact, Amy, I wanted you to expand upon that because, you know, when I asked you what surprised you in your research, one of the things that surprised me about 5 or 6 years ago when I found out about Pennsylvania Hall was I understand racism, understand slavery, but the malice, the wickedness, the hatred in terms of what was done at Pennsylvania Hall was beyond the pale. Talk more about that. What happened?
Yeah, Pennsylvania Hall was this gorgeous, brand new meeting place that abolitionist groups had worked together to get the funding for. A lot of that funding came from the work of the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society, a interracial female group that were fighting against slavery. And when word spread that there was going to be an anti-slavery convention in Philadelphia, notices went up calling people to come gather and protest at Pennsylvania Hall. And what they were offended by, this mob that assembled, well, a few things. One was that women spoke at this anti-slavery meeting. another thing was that they were talking against slavery, and many people in Philadelphia had connections to the institution of slavery, whether they were running a some kind of factory that relied on Southern products, or there were Philadelphia then, as it is now, was a capital of medical education. So Southern doctors were mostly educated in Philadelphia, so there were social connections. Anyway, and then the third thing that probably most offended the mob outside was what was known as amalgamation, or the mixing of the races. So eventually, it's kind of a complicated story, which I go into in the book, but complicated and yet simple. The mayor of the town was asked to help come protect Pennsylvania Hall. Instead, he left the mob in charge, and the place was destroyed. And even once it was destroyed, there was more violence and looting and rioting against Black Philadelphians. And the fire company came to the scene, but refused to put out fires that were burning, which was kind of, to me, a foreshadowing of what happened with MOVE in 1985. And the managers of Pennsylvania Hall chose to let the building, like the rubble of the building, remain there at 6th and what was then called Haynes Street. It's where WHYY is located today. But most people have no idea about it and are shocked when they hear this story. And it was a story that was, at the time, a nationally known story because of the scale of the destruction. I mean, this was a national anti-slavery convention where this happened, and yet somehow it fell into the waste bin, and people forgot about it. Michael, like you, I was born and raised in Philadelphia, educated in a school in the city, and never heard this story until I started teaching African American history. So the second section, anti-slavery, Civil War, Reconstruction in Philadelphia. That's probably a tougher one to think of an overarching theme. The third section, that it's an easier question for the 20th century. It's really about civil rights and Black power. And I didn't come up with this idea. This is following the thesis of Matthew Countryman, who wrote a fabulous book, Up South, Philadelphia during the Civil Rights and Black Power era. And he really shows Philadelphia as a place that was Black power before that term was even coined. So someone like Cecil B. Moore, for example, just had a much more aggressive civil rights approach than some of the other Southern leaders that we might think of. And there were, in Philadelphia, various approaches to civil rights. There was Sadie Alexander with the Human Relations Commission. There's Leon Sullivan with more focusing on economic self-sufficiency and economic empowerment. Cecil B. Moore, a lot about access, both to jobs and to education. And then, a figure like Father Paul Washington, who, although he was a man of the cloth, really came to understand the idea that at this time in the 1960s, it was really an appropriate time for Black people to separately build their own movement and, seize their own destiny.
I am truly impressed with you, Amy. I asked you to kind of summarize the book in less than 5 minutes. You perfectly summarized this great book. Over my left shoulder is Malcolm X, a portrait of Malcolm X, and you've referenced him. He has this quote. He says, "Make it plain." Amy Jane Cohen, you just made it perfectly plain, and we appreciate this. Amy, this show is called TV Courtroom, and like in many courtroom proceedings, at the very end, there's an opportunity for a closing argument. So in our final 2 minutes, I'm going to give you that opportunity. Anything you want to add, repeat, or highlight about the book. And then at the very end, give us that website that you mentioned. So first, the closing argument, and then contact information.
Okay. I can definitely do that. So a big takeaway of the book in general, well, let me give you two. One big takeaway I want folks to take from the book is that you can learn a lot just looking around the landscape, but all these changes that we've seen mostly in recent time, the new monuments, the addition of markers, the painting of murals, a lot of that comes from grassroots activism. No better example exists than what happened at the President's House Memorial,
Yes.
where initially the National Park Service didn't even want to acknowledge that there were slave quarters adjacent to the new Liberty Bell Pavilion. Within 8 years, it went from them not acknowledging it to the building of a memorial dedicated to the 9 enslaved people who lived there. And that came as a result of organization and activism, largely on your part, Michael. So that's one big takeaway, is learn from the landscape, but you can affect it. And the second takeaway is that this stuff matters. Like, no, erecting a historical marker or changing a street name, it's not going to right past wrongs, and it's not going to ensure a more just future, but it's a positive step. And I heard that again and again as I spoke to people while I was writing the book. And I want to make my final statement. It are the final 2 sentences in the book. And I can't say it any better than the brilliant poet Amanda Gorman, who people will remember spoke at Joe Biden's inauguration in 2021. She read a poem she wrote called "The Hill We Climb." And the final sentences of that, it's not the final sentence of the poem, but it's just a part of the poem that I just love. And she says, "It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it." And these small steps, seemingly small steps of acknowledging negative history, celebrating positive history and positive folks from the past, it's a repair. And you also wanted me to share my website, which I'm always happy to do, and people can contact me through it. You can learn about events. There's a teacher's guide up there, and it's amyjanecohen.com.
Folks, you've heard and been enlightened by Amy Jane Cohen, educator, historian, writer, and most important, good friend of yours truly, attorney Michael Court. Amy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
I want to have you on my radio courtroom show as a follow-up to my TV courtroom show. Most important, folks, get the book, Black History in the Philadelphia Landscape, Deep Roots, Continuing Legacy, Amy Jane Cohen. Amy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. This has been fun. Great weekend.
Folks, please make sure you get this book, powerful book, enlightening book. And as I told you at the beginning of the show, we were dealing with 2 topics. One, this book, Black History in the Philadelphia Landscape, and something that really got me excited and really got me fired up. There's a group called Youth Creating New Beginnings. And I'm not going to say it's a new group, but I will say it's new to me. And in my age, as an elder revolutionary, Nothing excites me and pleases me more than young people grabbing the baton from people like me and running with it. And that's exactly what Youth Creating New Beginnings is doing. And because of that, I have two of the members here on the show today. There's Alexis Carter Stewart, president, joined by Milaj Robinson, the executive director. And we're going to have both on the screen in just a couple seconds to talk to you about a panel discussion taking place tomorrow. We encourage you to show up. There's a press release of sorts that's been issued, and let me just read that before our guests are shown on the screen. We are Youth Creating New Beginnings, a youth empowerment nonprofit organization designed to provide the youth of Philadelphia with essential life skills through mentorship, civic engagement, college and career readiness, and professional development. It goes on to read, we are hosting an upcoming event called Talk Heavy. Action speaks louder than words. Tomorrow, Saturday, March 2, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. The event will be held at 1717 Allegheny Avenue, Philadelphia, PA 19123. And we understand that the members we're trying to connect with them are tied up in a number of activities right now in preparation for tomorrow. So we receive words that there might be a problem with them getting to the show. If so, not a problem. I'll talk more about them and talk about some other issues. But folks, please write this down. Tomorrow, Saturday, March 2, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., a group called Youth Creating New Beginnings will hold a youth empowerment panel discussion at 1717 Allegheny Avenue. Talk Heavy is a panel discussion on social issues within the city of Philadelphia with elected officials, grassroots organizations, community leaders, and the youth of the community. For me, that's the most important part, the youth of the community. Members of our council noted that the work you have done in the community, and they're talking to the media, via the media, is inspiring and motivational. We also encourage and acknowledge that this is a short notice. We would love to have the media cover this event. A number of elected officials and other candidates for the position of elected officials will be there. If we can get these two young people on the show today, we will have them. If not, because they are tied up with a number of other issues, don't worry about it. They'll be back during the next show. But for now, write this down. Talk Heavy. Action speaks louder than words. A panel discussion by Youth Creating New Beginnings on Saturday, March 2, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. The event will be held at 1717 Allegheny Avenue, Philadelphia, PA 19123. Having said that, folks, in our next, approximately 13 minutes, let me jump back to the Cheney issue and also jump back to Black history in the Philadelphia landscape. First, with the Cheney issue, there's an article that I encourage people to get, as our producer extraordinaire Roland posted on the screen. Go to phillytrib.com. That's phillytrib.com. When you get to that website, type in Michael Cord, C-O-A-R-D. And once you type in Cord, C-O-A-R-D, also type in Cheney. That's C-H-E-Y-N-E-Y. C-H-E-Y-N-E-Y to get all the articles I've written about Cheney. But for me, one of the highlights of the articles that I write about Cheney explains how it's in the situation it's in. I don't want to say plight, I just want to say situation. I started talking at the beginning of the show about this accreditation issue. And it's important to me as a member of the media here at PhillyCam doing the TV Courtroom show, on the radio, WURD 96.1 FM, the Philadelphia Tribune. As a member of the media, I have an obligation, I have a commitment, I have a mission to make sure make absolutely sure that the playing field is leveled, that it's balanced. Because unfortunately, in much of major white media, any discussions about Black stuff is going to be viewed in a negative light. I'm here to shine the positive light. And what I mean by that is this, and I'll get back to this book in just a second. You've heard in the last several days in the major media outlets here in Philadelphia that Cheney is on probation, and that if Cheney doesn't get through its probation properly, Cheney could lose its accreditation. And accreditation is important for any college or university. Accreditation means that you and your students at that college, at that university, can receive state loans and state grants and federal loans and federal grants, because most people don't have money to write a check for full tuition. They need state and federal grants and loans. But if you're not accredited, you can't receive those. So even though Cheney has always been tight and thorough regarding academics, this group called the Middle States Commission on Higher Education saying, you know, Cheney, you're a college, you're a university. You got to have your finances right. And if you don't have your finances right, you're not a proper business. If you're not a proper business, you could lose your accreditation. So this Middle States Commission says, we're not going to take it from you. You still have it in 2024. You've always had it in 2024 and before. But you need to get your finances right. So let me just spend a minute talking about this before we get to our guests. We're going to talk about youth creating new beginnings. I'm going to get to them in about 2 minutes, but let me just finish talking about this Cheney thing. So you might say, well, Mike, how did Cheney get into the position that it's in? Well, the answer is simple: systemic racism. Let's start from the very beginning. We were founded in 1837, so we're America's oldest HBCU. And as America's oldest HBCU, we were founded in 1837. That's about 30 years before slavery, quote unquote, ended in the United States. So we started with a major roadblock. Fast forward from 1837 to 1901. What happened in 1901? Well, here in Pennsylvania, by the way, give me about a minute and a half, folks, then we're going to get to our guests. Let me wrap up this discussion about Cheney. 1901, here's what happened. Cheney, which back then wasn't called Cheney University, but Cheney was actually receiving $25 per student from the state for tuition assistance, $25 per student. But if you went to one of the other white schools in Pennsylvania, they got $140 per student. Think about that. That's about 5 times the amount. So again, we're financially under the gun. Fast forward to 1969, the federal government looked all around the country and said, which states are treating Black folks in colleges the worst? Well, you guessed it. They named the top 10, the worst 10, Mississippi, Alabama, but included among those 10 was, Pennsylvania. That's 1969. Fast forward to 1983. Well, Pennsylvania had violated the agreements with the federal government to treat Black students properly. But in 1983, Pennsylvania finally issued an agreement saying, hey, we're going to finally treat Black students right. And the federal government said, okay, we see this. We rejected all these proposals you had in the past because it was BS, but this looks good. But the federal government found out shortly after that 1983 agreement that it wasn't worth the paper that it was signed on because Pennsylvania breached it. And then fast forward to 1999. 1999, at the insistence of the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was forced to treat Cheney properly. There's much more I have to share with you, but we got to get to our guest. We got to talk to the president of Youth Creating New Beginnings, because there's an event taking place tomorrow, Saturday, March 2, and we want you to know what's going on. So without further ado, Alexis Carter Stewart, president of Youth Creating New Beginnings. Let me just spend about 30 seconds before we hear from Alexis. This event taking place tomorrow, that Saturday, March 2 from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. is sponsored by Youth Creating New Beginnings. And the thing I love about this group is that it's led by young people. Older folks like me are to give up the baton, pass it to the younger generation, and let them run with it. And here's a prime example. Without further ado, Alexis Carter Stewart, president of Youth Creating New Beginnings. Alexis, how are you today?
Hi, how are you, Michael?
I'm doing well, and it's a pleasure to have you. Alexis, talk a little bit about yourself and about the organization before we get into tomorrow's event.
And I also have the co-founder with me as well. This is Milaj Robinson.
How's it going?
And Milaj, thank you for joining us. Milaj, I understand, is the executive director. So first, I'd like you both each to spend about 30 seconds talking about who you are, your background, and then I'll have you both talk about tomorrow's event. Let's start off with you, Alexis. A little bit about yourself.
So I am a senior criminal justice major. Well, let me first say that my age, I am a 22-year-old senior criminal justice major with a minor in American Sign Language at Temple University. I am from Montgomery County, Maryland, born and raised, and I have been in Philadelphia for 4 years. My passion and my drive in regards to the youth comes from me just growing up around or being in a community center since I've been a young girl. My mother has always been a director or a facilitator of community events. So the community engagement side of me has just always been deeply driven just because of my environment growing up. I am one that has been impacted by gun violence and restorative justice from just my surroundings and my family. So I'm extremely passionate about what I do in regards to making a difference for other individuals, especially our youth. And I'll pass it over to Milaj.
Yeah, and I don't know how I can piggyback off of that. She just really just spoke my life into existence. But side note, but my name is Milaj Robinson. I am a political science major at Morehouse College for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Logan section to be exact. Outside of Philadelphia, I say I'm from North, but my Philadelphia niggas know the distinct difference. But the reason that I really, wanted to start YCMB is because of 3 reasons, right? First reason is because I am the youth, I relate to the youth, and also I want to empower the youth. So being around, a lot of like-minded individuals and a lot of people that are stuck inside their environment and trapped inside their environment on a mental standpoint, with like an education, that really made me want to, beat the odds and become a product of my environment in a different type of light that propaganda and the news I'm trying to perpetuate on young Black men and just the youth in general.
It's such a relief. By the way, I don't know if you both know, but I'm your uncle. I just decided after hearing you both, I wanted to become your uncle, and now I am your uncle.
All right,
I'm just so impressed with you. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I've been practicing law for over 25 years, and as Milaj alluded to, when it comes to this system, it seems that the heaviest burden is on young Black men as far as systemic racism. 99.9% of my client base, young Black men between the ages of 15 and 25. So it's a relief to see somebody like Milaj on this TV show talking to me instead of me meeting him up on State Road in lockup because he's been accused of a crime. Because of you both, I got to tell you, the future looks bright. And it makes it much easier for me because I'm getting tired and I want to pass the baton. And you both have that baton and running with it. You have no idea about how excited I am after hearing both of you. I mean, I'm not going to get all teary-eyed and choked up, but I'm sincere when I say that it's such a relief to have young folks like this being the vanguard of the movement for societal change. I call myself the angriest Black man in America, but after hearing you both, I'm not as angry anymore because I really see there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Talk, you both, and I'll start off with you, Milaj, talk about Youth Creating New Beginnings. When was it founded and why was it founded?
Yes, and you just hit on a big significant reason on why I started it, right? And you said passing the baton. So that was the main reason why we created the organization and named it Youth Creating New Beginnings, right? So I started with my co-founder, Sierra Brown. She is also 21. We started when we was 17 years old. We first started off just having a book bag drive in Alany, and it was an amazing turnout. You know, we promoted probably within like a week. Sorry. We promoted it within like a week. We seen a good turnout, but then we was like, all right, let's take it to a whole nother level, right? Let's try to bring the community together about the things that we're going through personally. Because in that year of 2019, I lost my cousin and I also lost one of my friends within the same week. And they both was cool. You know, we was all in the same friend group. And she lost her friend, William Bethel, due to gun violence as well. So we was really trauma bonding, right? But we didn't turn that trauma into pain. We turned it into purpose. So once we did that, we had our first annual Youth Talk Heavy event, right? So we had youth panel, rappers, people that's a part of that started their own foundations, ministers, they entrepreneurs. So many different people came on the panel and talked about their lived experience, but not just talk about the problems that we face in our community, but the solutions, right? So, and we start, and now we're in our third one right now. Tomorrow is our third Talk Heavy event, new panel, everything. So, please make sure y'all come out. Crystal Ray High School, 1717 Allegheny. Thank you. I'm not gonna. I can go on all day.
Well, I got to tell, I just love your passion, your fire. Unfortunately, we got a late start, so we're running out of time. But I'm going to turn it over to Alexis. Alexis, in our final 90 seconds, minute and a half, what do you want to say? What do you want to add in our final minute and a half?
First, I would like to make a message to the youth. There is so much more that you all can do with yourselves. Again, we are an organization that is not looking at what your current circumstances are, but we are an impact and driven organization to, again, make change. So again, regardless of if you've been locked up, regardless of if you're failing school, regardless of if you're not in school, we are, again, ones that are going to be able to take you into a group of individuals, and you're going to be with your peers that are not only going to be able to not only set a path for themselves, regardless of if it's college, the military, trade school, we're going to be able to, again, create that personalized career path for you. Two, I would honestly like to say, Youth Creating New Beginnings is an organization that you're going to hear more of now. We want our name to ring throughout the city. We want our name to be able to ring throughout the nation and even across the world. At this point, our team, we call ourselves the Dream Chasers. But our team is again a youth-based team that has a fire in them that I've never seen before. We are very unique, and I promise you that this is not the last time that you all will hear from us. And this Talk Happy event is going to be historical. So with me closing out, be there, be square. Please meet us there. 1717 Allegheny Avenue. All are welcome. Please, we're looking for community members, rabbis, deacons, just everyone, honestly speaking. If you have a word, if you want to say something about what's going on in the community, please just come talk heavy with us.
Folks, join Alexis Carter and Milaj Robinson and their uncle, yours truly, Attorney Michael Cord, along with the other members of Youth Creating New Beginnings. I love the fact that this show is ending on such a positive vibe. You both have no idea about how happy you made me. I'm so glad it was ending because I'm really getting choked up right now. And I'm tough of a guy to be crying on camera, but I'm really, really impressed with you both. You have really inspired me, and I hope you inspire other folks. Join Youth Creating New Beginnings tomorrow. Talk Heavy. Action speaks louder than words. Saturday, March 2 from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. The event will be held at 1717 Allegheny Avenue. Thank you both. Have a wonderful weekend. Be safe. And those who are tuning in, I'm going to end the show like I end every show. It goes like this. Think Black. I'm out.